So I will begin with a brief overview of the circumstances related to the topic, which to the present day has not been truly researched or interpreted in a satisfying way. Women in ex-Yugoslavia, whereby I would like to emphasize that I'm only dealing with part of it here, entered photography relatively late and not without the problems. Even though after World War II women achieved an equivalent gender status and could work without being paid less or treated as a weaker sex, the situation was different in the field of photography. The fact that there was no academy where one could study photography meant that the basic knowledge was gained through the photo clubs. Moreover, the theory and criticism of photography were insufficiently and rarely taught at the university level. In the 90s, the situation changed with the establishment of MA program in the photography at the Academy of Dramatic Arts in Zagreb, but for many generations this improvement came too late. In the field of photography from the 50s until the 90s, women were often an exception, then confirmed the rule. The rare overviews dedicated to this topic often include only some basic informations, without approaching the female view in greater depth. It is known that Đuro Grizbach, photographer and president of the Photo Club Zagreb for many years, used to speak, and I quote, of tender emotions of the female type, end of quote, whenever women performed in public. In his introductory text, he praised the female beauty and wisdom, invoking Zeus, Olympus, gods, and elves. The mass media did not treat female authors any better. Top-selling newspapers and magazines emphasized the position of housewives, as Slavka Pavić was described, one of the still active photographers who just said to always carry a camera. This text also mentions specific motives. I quote, "Women work unobtrusively. They photograph landscapes, portraits. They choose quiet places where nobody disturbs them. Models whom they know well, motifs they are familiar with." End of quote. Exhibitions of female photographers started taking place in the early 70s at the small gallery in Zagreb that was to be dedicated to the general promotion of photography. However, this never happened. As a sort of curiosity, one should mention that the exhibitions were mostly organized as part of the celebration of the International Women's Day. That was in Yugoslavia celebrated with special enthusiasm. On that occasion, women's rights were specially mentioned that were not granted everywhere equally. Despite its socialist proclamation, the society remained traditional and patriarchal in many regions, and attention paid to women on that day was mostly accompanied by drinking bouts, while the good intentions were forgotten before the next morning. In the period after World War II, a crucial phenomenon was the emergence of the art group Exat 51, experimental atelier founded that year, whose members abandoned the conventional norm of separate artistic disciplines in favor of their synthesis. Sorry? Little bit. I will not have time enough. Okay. So, it was the first time that the difference between the so-called fine and applied arts was disregarded. They promoted abstraction and functioned as an opposition against the dominant cultural doctrine of academic realism, which suited the political climate in the post-war period. This also resulted in the foundation of the Academy of Applied Arts in Zagreb. It existed only for 6 years, until 1955, but left a considerable trace in several generations of artists trained there. One of them was Lydia Laforest, whose designer opus has been acknowledged only recently, toward the end of her life, while her photography has remained completely overlooked. Lydia Laforest graduated from the Academy of Applied Arts in 1955, and then worked as a graphic artist at the Photo Laboratory and a design counselor at the Federal Center for Training in Zagreb in 1961. She passed her master exam in photography in order to manage the family atelier in Herceg Novi in Montenegro that she had inherited from her father and that secured her financial independence. La Forest was the first photographer in the post-war period to experiment with various techniques and artistic procedures. This inclination can be traced back to her training period, during which she gathered the basic knowledge on various media, expanding it through her own research. Lydia La Forest primarily worked in the medium of drawing, while she applied in graphic design, wall painting, and various other forms. At the same time, she was active in photography, which is why the combination of media in her photographics, produced mostly in the 60s, is hardly surprising. She was also interested in photographs produced without a camera and experimented with the then popular technique of multiplying contact prints as black and white negatives. She often coupled the originals and the prints and even rotated the formats. In this way, she created simple black and white optical illusions, something like exercises for the two eyes seeing the different pictures. She also combined anthropomorphic forms juxtaposed in various positions. One of the best examples is her proposal for the cover page of The No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre. Some of her artworks seem to have been influenced by the contemporary musical events that she attended, such as the avant-garde music biennial in Zagreb during the 60s, and may also be related to some rare similar examples in experimental photographic practice from the first half of the 50s. Thus, her abstract photo-experimental compositions from the 60s may be traced back to the abstraction that emerged in the early 50s. Some of the La Forest work manifestly continues that of the already mentioned Exat 51 members, especially Alexander Srnec and Vlado Kristel. Srnec's graphic experiences used in design, which is also at least to some extent a feature of La Forest work, are some of the elements that may be related to the neo-avant-garde events that influenced her. We should especially mention the New Tendency movement, which encouraged experiments with the then new technical media and optical research. In 1958, Lydia La Forest visited the expo in Brussels. The preserved negatives document the chronology of her photographic interest at that time. It was primarily the main sensation of the fair, the Atomium, but also the Yugoslav pavilion, which attracted great attention. In one of the pavilions, she photographed her own reflection in the mirror, with the illuminated Atomium in the background. The almost completely dark figure of the artist with the Rolleiflex in her hands is the first such self-portrait in Croatian female post-war photography. The scene is dominated by the structures of warrior materials and the central motive of her photo documentation, the Brussels exhibition. The standing female figures suggest taking a very brief break from photographing. Regarding the rest of her oeuvre, it tells of the position that she determined by herself, even though the shot may be interpreted as a positioning herself as a subject, a reminiscence of Vivian Maier, for example. It is more of a note made in passing. In this photograph, she documented her professional status in the camera position and her body posture, something that she would never repeat. In Southeast Europe, female artists used the philosophy of post-structuralism and its analysis of the position of power to explore their only possible power, that of the private sphere. Within the framework, they could question domination as well as topics such as submission and supremacy. In the 70s, as part of the conceptual practice, Edita Schubert started to explore photography. Her work is inseparable from her biography as a social, cultural construct constituting her identity as an artist. Schubert often exposed her biography and privacy in various phases of her life. She inserted photographs in laboratory dishes, photocopied or painted them. Her series, Self-Portrait Behind Perforated Canvas, starts with the photograph showing the slashing of the canvas painted in black, and the triangular cutting secured with a simple adhesive bandage. This sort of wounding the canvas is a consequence of Schubert's artistic procedure. Having primed the canvas and covered it in paint, she started with its dissection. It is not unimportant to mention that she spent most of her professional career as a drawer at the Anatomy Institute of the Faculty of Medicine in Zagreb. Thus, Edita Schubert literally dissected the painting, folding the segments and fixing them with an adhesive bandage in order to make room for further performance and for photographing it. The canvas became a folding screen, a starting phase of a photographic sequence established as a series that frontally addressed the spectator. On that way, she achieved the first-person relationship and mediating her corporal and haptic experience at the same time. Schubert's protocol of discarding motifs resulting in meaningless shots, such as her photographs of antique panel doors, which she produced in the same year as her self-portrait. In this series, she repeated a seemingly unimportant motif, perhaps unaware of the existence of another photograph, which was meanwhile acquired an almost mythical status in former Yugoslavia. Schubert is important both for her employment of explicit autobiographical discourse and a series of photographic images following her early works, in which she simulated photographs by using painting technique. Her shots are the signifiers of her own identity, but whereas in her paintings certain signifiers indicate construction that are usually related to female identity, such as lipsticks, hairpins, or summer dress, the dominant motifs in her photographs are different in tone and serve to explain the artist's mind. Schubert resorted more than once to such multiplication of motifs, combined with the strategies of appropriation, recycling, and singling out the meaning of a particular object in order to transfer it to a different medium, place it in a box, stamp it, or confront it with other scenes. It had become evident in her earlier artworks that she related the medium of photography to the reality. And even if that reality was rather uninteresting, such as the everyday walk from her home to the Faculty of Medicine, where she always climbed the same stairs, Schubert launched it into public space by means of photography, which thus became its support. As early as the 70s, a series of actions and events provided the citizens of Zagreb with the first instructions on how to behave in a direct encounter with contemporary art in public space. But unlike the visible and far larger installation produced in the 70s, Schubert entered the city center with an artwork that was almost invisible. Schubert involved the passers-by, inviting them to take a look around her private space, at objects from her everyday life and the exterior of the house she lived in. Small styrofoam installations, so-called diavisors, were part of the larger hall, a showcase in which merchandise was offered for sale. The exhibition context became more complex, and the spectator was now a structural element in anthropological space that included the street, the observer, and other casual passers-by. Although the installation mainly reminded of a stereoscopic shot, the depth was not achieved by optical illusion, but was mentally simulated by coupling the interior with the exterior. A somewhat more intimate artwork was her last installation, Horizon, which she created toward the end of her life in 2000. 7 hoops were hanging in space at the eye level, suspended by thin transparent threads and covered with photographs on the inside and outside. The sequences had been shot in various places she had visited: Lucca, Paris, Zagreb, Venice, Mainz, and the island of Vir, showing their horizons. And these horizons were like the range of vision, functioning as a perpetuating gaze that simulated the place where the artist had once stood, sharing it with the observer. At the moment when she created the installation, she was aware of the unreachability of the horizon, yet guided by the intention of allowing transgression into the dimension of her gaze. It has been an unfortunate task, having to single out particular artists and artworks that were symptomatic of the specific social and political circumstances emerging in the 50s. Besides, it is impossible to avoid the framework in which these art practices were constructed, its disappearance creating a peculiar situation for many. The question whether one's identity is necessarily linked to one's nation or a particular place must remain open, and it is a matter of personal decision how one will form or define oneself. With Dragana Jurišić, the question of identity has been emerging continuously and with a good reason. Her art practice has made me question my own political identity, bringing me into the position to ask myself about the importance of belonging somewhere. And these questions, when asked anywhere in the territory of former Yugoslavia, prove difficult and the answers unpredictable. The book that served Dragana Jurišić as a sort of guide through the remnants of the common context that collapsed in the early 90s was Black Lamb and Grey Falcon by Rebecca West. It is a repository of memories that are to some extent factual, but partly function as narrative constructs that we may believe yet needn't do so. Dragana work is intertextual. It refers to the red text by means of photographs and brief notes resulting from her taking a similar path. The documentary aesthetics of these photographs present a self-evident idea of home, its loss, and the effort not to forget it. The series thus raised the question on the limitations that individuals and community must face in their attempts at overcoming the repressive politics of identity to which the idea of home is related. In her series, You, Lost Country, and You is Yugoslavia, we have an opportunity to see the past in the present. But whose past, whose present is it? We behave like a potential participant. We glance through a book or look at shots in various formats. We show interest in the itinerary or perhaps recall some places that we have visited ourselves, remembering them differently. In that sense, Dragana's story, running parallel to Rebecca's book, halts in pages where we are shown that there were places in Yugoslavia where people didn't want anything new, as they were satisfied with the old. And while I'm reading a page in Dragana's book where she refers to Rebecca's text, I come across the information that she has asked a friend to take the films she shot there, out of the zone burdened by the past conflict and the potential new one. A note describes an image that remains to be developed and offered to a viewer. The text here functions as an image, and finally, I have no idea how this image looks like. It functions as a place that we approach, a place of coexistence between various elements from Rebecca's and Dragana's stories. And all of them together, the two authors and the protagonists of events in the text and the photographs, participate in the construction of cultural identity consisting of memories and historical circumstances, subjected to a compression that makes it hard to discern the details. In the series My Own Unknown, we encounter various decisions in relation to which we make our judgment on the fictional and actual characters. A result of research on the circumstances of life and death of female relative, filled with unknown, the series comprises various notes and working shots. The author has built her narrative by filling notebooks with photographs and comments, documenting her research and the potential information on the person whose figure, among other things, she linked to the dead mask of the woman who had drowned in the Seine. With her procedures, the artist has indicated the complexity of female identity, comprised of the activities of an archivist, a photographer, a passant, a drowned woman. 3 isolated stories from seemingly 3 different unconnected periods. The experiments and concepts discussed in this presentation indicate the importance and variety of relations that female artists establish with the social reality in which they are active and to which they make references, as well as the ideology as a system of psychological expectations, spiritual standpoints, gained experiences, and moral principles, as Umberto Eco once wrote. After the late 60s, and especially in the 70s, photography became a field of knowledge, experience, and memory, whereby the visual aspects based on the question how was no longer in the focus. This extended significance of photography was a result of ethical decisions and the need of introducing a new language which allowed the flow and even clashing of visibilities, meanings, and insights, which I try to present on this occasion. Thank you.